Nobody looked twice when she stepped off the bus. That was the point. She wore plain jeans, a worn grey hoodie, and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder, like she'd carried it 1,000 miles already. Because she had. Her hair was pulled back, loose strands escaping at her temples from a rubber band that looked like it had been on her wrist before it found her hair. No makeup, no jewelry, nothing that caught light. One set of earbuds coiled in her front pocket that she hadn't touched in 6 hours. Her name on the intake roster was Sergeant Maya Doss. But nobody at Fort Jackson's Red Phase processing station knew that yet. They saw a woman in her early 30s who looked like she might have shown up to the wrong address. A bit too old, a bit too quiet, carrying nothing that asked for attention. That was also the point. There were 34 other recruits stepping off the buses that morning, mostly men, mostly 18, 19, 20, faces still carrying the baby fat of a life that hadn't hit them yet. A few women scattered through the group, standing a little apart from the clusters of men the way women often do in new spaces, gauging the temperature before settling. They all looked at each other the way strangers do when they don't know yet who's going to matter. Maya counted the exits first. 3. 2 visible, the main gate to the left, and the administrative building entrance straight ahead. And one she'd clocked behind the vehicle bay, on the eastern edge, partially obscured by a chain-link fence and a maintenance shed. She noted the tree line next, running along the northern perimeter. Mixed pine and scrub oak, 200 meters, the kind of cover that worked well in low light. Then she noted the fence height, the spacing of the posts, the security cameras on the admin building. Then she looked at the drill sergeants. The lead was a man named Holloway, Staff Sergeant Holloway, who had 14 years in service, 2 combat tours in places that still had sand in his gear, and a voice that sounded like gravel being dragged across concrete at 40 miles per hour. He walked the line of new recruits with the slow, unhurried confidence of a man who'd already decided what he thought of each one before they'd opened their mouths. This was a performance of certainty, and he was very good at it. When he got to Maya, he stopped. He looked at her the way you look at something that doesn't quite fit the pattern you're used to seeing. Her age, her stillness, the duffel bag she'd set at her feet without dropping it. Most recruits either strangled their bags nervously or threw them down, the anxiety going somewhere. She'd just set it down, precise and flat, like it was going in a rack she'd already planned for. "How old are you?" he asked. 32, she said. He looked at her the way people look at a car with the wrong plates on the right road. "You sure you're in the right place?" "Yes, drill sergeant." He didn't say anything else. He moved on. But something in the set of his jaw shifted. She noticed it because she noticed everything. And she knew she'd been categorized. Filed under curiosity, filed under liability, filed under she'll quit by week 2. She had no intention of quitting. They started at 4:30 in the morning. The lights in the barracks flipped on like a camera flash, sudden and merciless, and Holloway's voice came with them before anyone's eyes had adjusted, before anyone had taken a breath that wasn't sleep. "Formation in 4 minutes. Anyone who's late does my push-ups for the next hour, and I do a lot of push-ups." Maya was already laced up. She'd been awake since 4:12, lying still on her bunk, listening to the bass settle into its pre-dawn sounds. The hiss of the HVAC, the distant rumble of a truck on the perimeter road. Somewhere in the barracks, 3 bunks down, someone had been grinding their teeth in their sleep. She'd catalogued it all without deciding to, the way some people catalogue conversation without deciding to listen. She stood second from the left in the formation, hands at her sides, face forward. The recruit next to her, a 19-year-old from somewhere in Georgia named Tate, who had the kind of build that suggested he'd spent his teenage years in a weight room, and the kind of eyes that suggested he hadn't yet decided what he was doing here, was still fighting with his bootlace. He managed it with 30 seconds to spare. Holloway paced the formation once, twice, 3 times without speaking. He had a way of using silence like a weapon, filling it with something worse than noise. Most of the recruits were starting to sweat before he'd said a word. Their bodies were responding to an authority they didn't understand yet, preparing for something their minds hadn't caught up to. Then PT started. Push-ups first. The standard requirement for female recruits in Maya's age bracket was 13 in 2 minutes. She did 13 in the first 40 seconds, paused for 1 measured breath, not catching her breath, just pacing, and did 13 more. Her back stayed flat, a ruler pressed against her spine. Her arms moved with a precision that wasn't effortful. It was simply the way she moved, not showing off, not demonstrating anything, just doing the work. Holloway didn't notice, not yet. Then flutter kicks on the red clay ground, the Georgia earth still holding the night school in its top inch. Then bear crawls across 40 yards of field, hands and boots, reading the terrain without looking down. Then a 2-mile run around the perimeter road, while the sun came up in long horizontal cuts between the pines, painting the red clay orange and turning the steam rising off it into something almost beautiful if you had the inclination to notice beauty at 5:15 in the morning. Maya ran at the middle of the pack. Not first, not last. She could have been first. She felt the contained energy in her legs, the familiar rhythm that she'd had since a training program that she was not going to think about right now. But she chose the middle and matched pace with the group around her, monitoring the recruits who were starting to labor at the 1-mile mark. She noted which ones breathed through their nose and which ones through their mouth. She noted who looked at the ground when it got hard and who kept their eyes on the horizon. She noted the 2 recruits near the back who were going to be problems by week 2 if someone didn't help them fix their form before the damage became cumulative. Tate ran beside her at one point, his breathing already ragged at the halfway mark, his arms crossing his center line, which was costing him energy he didn't have to spare. "Slow your breathing," she said, not breaking stride. "Out through the nose, not the mouth." He looked at her like she'd said something in a foreign language. "Your arms are crossing," she added. "They go forward and back, not across." He tried it. His pace wobbled, then steadied. By the time they hit the final quarter mile, he was breathing better than he had at the start. He didn't ask her name until after the run, when they were both bent over with hands on knees at the finish point, though she was bent over more out of propriety than necessity. "Maya," she said. "You done this before?" he asked. "Done what?" He gestured vaguely at the red clay, the pine trees, the drill sergeants watching from the perimeter, with clipboards and the particular expression of people who are paid to find inadequacy. All this. "First time," she said. That was technically true. By day 3, Holloway had formed a specific and considered opinion about Maya. It wasn't a complimentary one, but it wasn't entirely dismissive either, which was unusual. He'd processed hundreds of recruits, and most of them landed cleanly in one column or the other within the first 24 hours. This one didn't land cleanly. She was quiet when the others were talking. Not the quiet of someone who had nothing to say, but the quiet of someone who had already decided talking wasn't worth the energy right now. She didn't complain when the water was warm, or the MRAs had the worst combinations, or the morning inspection had Holloway picking at things that a reasonable person would have considered perfectly clean. She didn't flinch at the 4:30 lights, didn't drag herself awake the way the others did, didn't carry the fog of interrupted sleep on her face for the first 40 minutes of the day. That stillness irritated Holloway in a way he couldn't easily categorize. He understood loud. He understood scared. He understood the gradual erosion of a recruit's civilian self, the small, specific humiliations that accumulated into a tearing down, and the slow rebuilding that happened in their place, layer by layer, into something harder and more useful. That was the process. He'd performed it hundreds of times. He believed in it. But Maya didn't seem to be eroding. She didn't seem to be needing rebuilding. She just seemed to already be something that he hadn't managed to name yet. He singled her out during rifle familiarization on day 4. The recruits were given M16A2 training rifles, unloaded for handling and disassembly exercises. The point was exposure to the mechanics, the deliberate unfamiliarity of it, the way it clarified who had handled weapons before, and who had only seen them on screens. Holloway stood behind Maya's shoulder while she field-stripped hers and watched her move through it with a quiet, unhurried speed that shouldn't have existed in a first-time recruit's hands. She didn't look at the parts. She felt them. The bolt carrier group came out smoothly. The charging handle, the buffer and spring eased out with a control that said she knew what happened if you let it go too fast. Each piece went on the surface in front of her in sequence, each one oriented the same direction. "You read the manual," Holloway said. "Yes, Drill Sergeant." Memorizing manuals isn't the same as knowing how to use it. "Understood, Drill Sergeant." Most civilians get tense handling a firearm for the first time. "You know why?" "Because it's unfamiliar," she said. "You're not tense." "No, Drill Sergeant." He picked up her disassembled rifle and looked at the components arranged precisely in front of her. He put it down without speaking and moved to the next recruit, where he had considerably more to say. That afternoon, during a land navigation exercise, he assigned her the hardest route, the one with the false summit and the unmarked creek crossing that caught most recruits on their first pass, because the creek wasn't where the contour lines suggested it would be, if you read the map without reading the terrain. He gave Tate the same route and watched to see how they managed against each other. Maya finished 9 minutes ahead of Tate and was sitting on a log in the shade at the checkpoint, studying the horizon line, when Holloway arrived with his stopwatch. He wrote something in his notebook. She didn't ask what it was. By the second week, the group had found its rhythm, the way groups always do in high-stress conditions, through the sorting pressure of shared misery. The recruits who were going to wash out were already starting to show the early signs. The 1,000-yard stare at breakfast, the one that meant the body was present, but the mind was somewhere warmer and easier. The micro-expressions during evening inspections, the slight trembling of the lower lip that a person tried to hold still and almost succeeded. The way certain recruits had started looking at the exit roads with a specific quality of longing. Not conscious, probably, but visible to anyone paying attention. Maya paid attention. She always paid attention. She helped Tate with his map reading on a Tuesday evening, in the narrow window of time between dinner and lights out, bent over his map with him, and working through the relationship between contour lines and real terrain using a water bottle to represent elevation. She helped a recruit named Foster with her push-up form, not in a way that drew Holloway's attention, just a quiet suggestion during a water break that Foster's wrists needed to stack directly under her shoulders, not in front of them, and that her hips needed to lock in before her chest dropped, or she'd eventually blow out a shoulder. Foster's push-up numbers improved within 3 days. She did these things without announcing them. She did them because they were in front of her, and because the alternative was watching someone struggle through a correctable problem, which was a particular kind of waste she didn't have patience for. Holloway noticed. He didn't like it. There was something philosophically wrong by his understanding of basic training's purpose, about a recruit who was helping other recruits before she'd been properly through the machine herself. The process required individual struggle. It required the erosion of the civilian self. A recruit who was lifting others before she'd been broken was disrupting a system that had been calibrated over decades, so he started giving Maya the extras. After the standard evening run, while the other recruits were cooling down and heading for the showers, she was told to run it again. She ran it again at the same pace as the first time, her breathing through her nose, her form identical. After morning PT, while others rested in the 20-minute window before chow, she was assigned remedial rifle drill. This despite her scores being in the top 3% of the class. She ran the drills without complaint, each rep the same as the last, the muscle memory precise and unhurried. "You mad?" Tate asked her one evening, when they were both sitting on their footlockers, cleaning their rifles in the low yellow light of the barracks, the smell of CLP and hot metal and boot polish thick in the air. "No," she said. "He's going after you specifically." "I know." "Why do you think that is?" She ran a bore brush through the barrel and held it up to check the light through it. "Because I'm not breaking the way he expects me to," she said. "And that bothers him. He's not a bad sergeant. He just doesn't know what to do with something that doesn't fit his pattern." Tate absorbed this. "So what are you going to do about it?" "Keep doing my job," she said. She locked the rifle back together and set it down and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. "The extras aren't punishment," she said. "Not really. They're a test. He's trying to find where I break. If I keep running and the break doesn't come, eventually he'll run out of test." She paused. "Or he'll find the break. Either way, I'll know something." Tate stared at her. "You're the most unbothered person I've ever met." She almost smiled. "Almost. Don't let it fool you," she said. Day 14 was the one Holloway had been building toward. The 12-mile ruck march. Full kit, 35-pound pack, over terrain that had been chosen deliberately for its variety and misery. 2 creek crossings. A switchback trail through the eastern pine section that had a grade that turned the last 2 miles into something that separated the bodies from the spirits. They started at 5 a.m. in the last dark before dawn, with headlamps permitted for the first hour. The weather had turned overnight. The temperature had dropped 12 degrees. And the previous evening's rain had left standing water in the lower fields and turned the trail sections into mud that grabbed at boots like a living animal, the kind that pulled at the heel and tested the laces on every step. By the time they reached the first creek crossing, the mud was ankle deep and the creek was running higher than the maps suggested. Two of the recruits hesitated at the crossing. The water was cold and fast, and the stones at the bottom were rounded and slick, and the guide rope stretched across had a visible sag in the middle. That said, it had been put there by someone who installed it in better conditions than these. Maya studied the water for about 3 seconds. She moved 3 steps left of the main crossing, found a line of stones, higher and less swept by the current, and crossed on those, fast and deliberate, boots dry when she reached the other side. She didn't comment on it. She kept moving. Holloway had been watching from the bank. He didn't say anything either. At the base of the switchback trail, with 4 miles still to go and the sun now fully up and already pressing heat down through the pine canopy, he moved up beside her. "How are your legs?" he asked, not in the drill sergeant voice, a different register. "Fine, drill sergeant. You're not breathing hard. I'm breathing fine. Most recruits are laboring by now." She said nothing. He tried a different approach. "What did you do before this?" he asked. "I was a contractor," she said. "What kind of contractor?" "Technical support," she said. She kept her eyes on the trail. He looked at her for a long moment. "Technical support," he repeated, as if he was playing the words back to see if they meant something different the second time. "Yes, drill sergeant." He fell back without another word. She kept walking, eyes forward, breathing through her nose, each step deliberate on the wet switchback grade. The march took 3 hours and 42 minutes. Maya finished in the first cluster, among the top 8 recruits. Her pack was still buckled exactly as it had been at the start. Her boots were laced correctly. She did not sit down when they reached the end point. She stood and watched the remaining recruits come in, counting them quietly under her breath, until all 32 present for duty were accounted for. Nobody got lost. Nobody had to be medically evacuated. She was the only one watching to make sure. Day 19. The sun came up already angry. By 6 a.m., the temperature was 89 degrees, and the humidity had settled over the base like something with weight to it. The kind that made breathing feel like a second exercise layered over the first. The red clay had dried after the rains and now radiated heat from below, while the sky pushed it from above. Everything smelled of dry earth and perspiration, and the particular institutional smell of a military training base, cleaning solution, diesel, boot rubber, gun oil. All of it intensified by the heat into something almost chemical. Holloway ran them hard, harder than any single morning since red phase began. It was the last week before the transition into white phase, and Holloway was doing what he always did at this point, applying maximum pressure to see what was still soft underneath. Who would hold shape and who would deform? 3 sets of push-ups with short rests between. Planks held until several recruits were shaking through their whole bodies. Jumping jacks that looked absurd in their simplicity and were genuinely brutal in their duration. Then the combat PT circuit. Squat thrusts, mountain climbers, lateral shuttle sprints over 20 meters, repeated until Holloway decided they were done. By the 3rd round of the circuit, everyone was soaked through. Sweat had darkened every collar, every back, every waistband. The heat bounced off the clay surface, and the recruits moved through it like they were pushing through something slightly thicker than air. It was during the 5th round of mountain climbers that recruit Briggs, 22, Montana, built like someone who'd grown up carrying heavy things, went down with leg cramps. He called it out immediately, hand up. Not a quitter, but someone whose body had simply hit a physiological wall, and the assistant drill sergeant moved to him. Maya stopped her set and stood up. That was when it happened. She reached back to adjust the collar of her PT shirt, which had bunched up under her pack straps during the circuit, and twisted into a knot at the back of her neck. One hand reaching back, pulling the collar down. A single, ordinary motion, and the shirt came free from her waistband at the same moment, riding up in the back. She didn't notice. She was already moving, reaching, adjusting, looking toward Briggs to gauge how bad the cramp was, and the shirt stayed riding up for 4, 5, 6 seconds. Holloway had been walking the eastern edge of the circuit, and he turned in her direction at exactly the wrong moment or the right one, depending on perspective. He stopped. He stood completely, entirely still, in a way that was different from his usual command posture. Not the stillness of authority, the stillness of something flooding in and needing a moment to process. Across the full width of Maya's upper back, from shoulder blade to shoulder blade and running down to the base of her spine, was a tattoo. Not decorative, not a name or a scripture or a design that belonged to any civilian tradition of self-expression. This was something else. The lines were fine and precise, dark ink that had settled cleanly into the skin over enough years that the edges had the slight softening that comes with time and exposure. A stylized eagle, wings wide. Below it, a trident overlapping an anchor. A pistol beneath that. The composite symbol of special operations. Not the general version, the specific one, the one that appeared in classified programs. But that wasn't what stopped Holloway. Below the symbol, in text small enough that you had to be close to read it. And he was close enough. Was a unit designation, a number, a theater date, and below that, a set of coordinates in a format that was not the standard military coordinate system, which meant it was from a system that wasn't standard military, which meant it was from a program that didn't use standard military systems, because standard military systems were accessible, and this program was not. Holloway had been around long enough to have been in a room where certain names were spoken in a specific tone. Long enough to recognize what that unit designation meant, even though he'd never been read into any program that carried it. You didn't have to be read in to understand the weight of it. You just had to have paid attention. He stood behind Maya for 4 full seconds. She pulled her shirt down. She turned and looked at him, not caught, not startled, not running the calculations of someone who'd been discovered. Just looked. Her expression was the same as it always was, level, still, the way a lake is still when there's nothing disturbing its surface, not because there's nothing underneath it. "Problem, drill sergeant?" she asked. He didn't answer. He walked to the north edge of the field. He took out his radio. The call lasted 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Holloway stood at the perimeter with his back to the field and spoke quietly enough that none of the recruits could hear him. The assistant drill sergeant took over the circuit without being told to. The recruits kept moving. Maya led them through the remaining rounds. She didn't look at Holloway once. She called the reps in the same flat, measured voice she used for everything, set the pace, kept the energy from collapsing in the heat. The recruits followed her, the way people follow someone who knows what they're doing, without deciding to, without being asked, just because the gravity of competence is a real force. When Holloway came back, he didn't look at her. He pulled the assistant drill sergeant to the edge of the field and spoke for about 30 seconds. The assistant looked across the field at Maya, then back at Holloway, then nodded once in the way of someone who has just been told something that raises more questions than it answers, but knows this isn't the moment to ask them. They finished the morning PT block. They went to chow, and the chow was what it always was: protein, starch, institutional vegetable. And the recruits ate with the focused silence of people running a calorie deficit. Maya ate everything on her tray. She drank 2 full glasses of water. She did not look distracted. The afternoon was a weapons qualification block. Firing positions, sight alignment, trigger control, shooting at paper targets at 25 meters, 50 meters, 100 meters. Maya's scorecard at the end of the block was clean. Every target hit, every drill completed in sequence. The range master looked at her scorecard, and then at her, and then back at the scorecard. He didn't say anything. He handed it back. At 1700, a vehicle arrived at the base. Not an ordinary base vehicle. A black Suburban with no visible plates and red clay dust along its lower panels, like it had been driven fast on dirt roads. It parked outside the Red Phase Administrative Building without calling ahead, which meant it had authorization that preceded the call. 2 people got out. One was a man in civilian clothes, dark jacket, unremarkable, who swept the perimeter with his eyes before his feet touched the ground, which was a particular kind of reflex that had nothing to do with civilian life. The other was in uniform, full service dress, ribbons and medals arranged in a stack on the left chest that told a story just by their presence and their ordering. The way the medals of someone who has been in the right places at the right time tell a story without needing explanation if you know how to read the language. Colonel's eagle on the collar. His name was Colonel David Rains. 23 years of continuous service. 2 distinguished service medals. A silver star that didn't appear in his publicly accessible record for reasons that were themselves classified. He had been specifically requested, or had specifically requested Fort Jackson, depending on which part of the arrangement you were looking at. He walked past the administrative staff without signing in. The recruits were in final formation for evening accountability. 34 voices, 32 remaining present for duty, 2 on medical hold, calling off in sequence while the day finished itself in bands of orange and pink across the Georgia sky to the west. The pines along the perimeter darkened to silhouettes. The base smelled of cooling clay and dinner from the mess hall and the faint persistent smell of gun oil that never entirely left. Holloway called them to attention when Rains appeared at the perimeter of the field. Rains walked directly to the formation. He didn't approach Holloway first. He walked the line the way a person walks through a space they have a right to be in. Not hurrying, not performing authority, just moving through it. He stopped 2 paces in front of the formation. He looked at the line of recruits. 32 of them standing straight, sweating through their uniforms in the end-of-day heat, tired in the particular way of people who have been tested comprehensively and survived one more day of it. Then he walked the line. Slowly. 3 seconds per recruit approximately, looking at each face without expression. He passed Tate. He passed Foster. He passed the recruit from Montana who'd gone down with cramps that morning and was standing fine now, jaw set. He stopped at Maya. He looked at her for one moment. The kind of moment that has weight in it, not dramatic, not staged, just the specific weight of recognition. Two people in the same country for the first time in a long time, maybe. Or the specific recognition of someone you know outside of context, appearing inside a context you didn't expect them to occupy. Then Colonel David Rains came to parade rest. He said her rank. The full rank. Not what the intake roster said. Not what the red phase processing system had processed. The rank that existed in a different system, in a different kind of record. The kind of record that required specific clearances to access and left no digital trail when you did. He said it the way you say something that has been true for a long time, but hasn't had occasion to be said out loud in exactly this way, clearly, without ceremony, without the way a fact is stated. The formation went very quiet, not the enforced quiet of command, the organic quiet of people processing something that doesn't fit their current understanding of the situation. Tate, standing 2 people down from Maya, looked at her, then at the colonel, then back at her. His mouth had opened slightly. Holloway, at the flank of the formation, had gone still. Not the stillness of authority, the stillness of a man recalibrating every assessment he had made over the last 19 days and understanding that every single one of them had been aimed at the wrong target. Rains said one more thing. 4 words, he said. "It's time to go." Maya looked at him for 1 second. Just one. Then she said, "Yes, sir." She turned back to face the field. Just a breath, really, just the space of a heartbeat, and looked at the line of recruits she'd run beside and fed push-up corrections to, and counted off at the end of creek crossings. Then she stepped out of formation. Nobody said anything. Nobody breathed too loudly. Holloway didn't move until she was 3 steps past him, and then he did something that none of the recruits in that formation had ever seen him do in 14 years, or any formation, anywhere. He came to attention, heels together, chin up, back straight. His arm rose, his hand was precise at his brow, thumb in, fingers flat, in a salute that was not required by protocol, and was not casual, and was not performed. It was given. 3 of the recruits nearest to him did it automatically and without instruction, the way you respond to something with an obvious gravity before your brain has finished the sentence that explains it. One by one, down the line, the rest followed. 32 recruits at attention, giving a salute to a woman in plain PT clothes who was walking toward a black Suburban in the last light of a Georgia evening. Maya walked without looking back. Her duffel was already packed. She always packed at night in case the morning changed. Here is what that formation didn't know. 8 years before Fort Jackson, Maya had completed the selection and assessment process for a unit whose public-facing designation was 3 letters and whose actual function was considerably more specific.